In the blink of an eye, a peaceful fishing trip turns deadly when a massive shark breaches the water, ramming a small boat and dragging the fisherman into the depths. Blood fills the sea as nearby boats rush to help, but rescue efforts end with nothing more than floating gear and a trail of red. In this video, you'll witness 6 of the most terrifying shark encounters caught on camera, each one a chilling reminder of the ocean's unpredictability. Jack Connors had always felt at home on the water. At 52 years old, he was a seasoned fisherman who had been navigating the Gulf of Mexico for decades, casting lines off the coast of Louisiana. On July 18, 1999, Jack set out from the Venice Marina, known as the fishing capital of the world. It was a sunny afternoon and the water was calm, perfect conditions for fishing. Jack had an 18-foot boat, a reliable old vessel that had served him well over the years. That morning, Jack had filled his cooler with bait, checked his gear, and prepared his rods for a long day of fishing. He was targeting redfish and speckled trout, hoping to bring in a big catch to sell at the local market. He even brought an extra lunch, planning to enjoy the solitude and quiet of the open sea. Venice's waters are rich in marine life, teeming with various species of fish, rays, and even sea turtles. But beneath the surface lurked other creatures, predators like bull sharks and tiger sharks. These sharks were well known in the Gulf, often patrolling the deeper waters, attracted by the abundance of fish. By early afternoon, Jack had reached his usual spot about 5 miles offshore. It was quiet, with only a few distant boats visible on the horizon. He cast his line and waited patiently, enjoying the rhythm of the waves against his boat. He felt a familiar sense of peace, surrounded by nothing but the ocean and the occasional seabird overhead. Jack had caught a few small fish already, but he was aiming for something bigger. He baited his hook with a large chunk of fish, hoping to lure a redfish. Suddenly, Jack felt a strong pull on his line. He braced himself, tightening his grip and adjusting his stance. Whatever was on the other end was strong, and Jack's muscles tensed as he tried to reel it in. The rod bent under the pressure, straining against the fish's resistance. Jack's heart raced with excitement. This was exactly the kind of challenge he had hoped for. As he continued to reel, Jack noticed something strange beneath the surface. A dark, fast-moving shadow circling his boat. He squinted, trying to get a better look, and his heart sank. It was a tiger shark, and a large one at that, likely over 12 feet long. Tiger sharks are known for their aggressive behavior and opportunistic feeding habits. Jack had encountered sharks before, but they rarely came this close. The shark circled slowly, its dorsal fin occasionally breaking the surface. Jack kept a wary eye on the predator while trying to maintain control of his catch. But the shark wasn't just curious. It seemed agitated, drawn by the thrashing fish and the vibrations from Jack's struggling boat. Without warning, the shark slammed into the side of the boat, causing it to lurch violently. Jack nearly lost his balance, grabbing onto the railing to steady himself. Jack tried to maintain control, hoping the shark would lose interest. But the predator's behavior only became more aggressive. It bumped the boat again, this time with more force. Jack felt the impact reverberate through the hull, and the boat tilted dangerously. He knew he had to let go of the fish he was reeling in. It was attracting the shark, and he needed to focus on keeping his boat upright. But the situation quickly escalated. The shark, now more determined, made a sudden, powerful lunge at the boat. Its massive head breached the water, and its jaws snapped dangerously close to the edge. The force of the attack was too much for the small vessel. Jack lost his footing and was thrown overboard, hitting the water hard. Disoriented and stunned, Jack surfaced, gasping for air. The cold water shocked his system, and he struggled to get his bearings. He looked around, trying to find his boat, which was now a few feet away, bobbing erratically. He felt a surge of fear. The shark was still circling, and he was now in its territory. Desperate to get back to the boat, Jack started swimming as fast as he could. He was a strong swimmer, but the weight of his wet clothes and the choppy waves made it difficult to move quickly. He kicked hard, trying to close the distance. Suddenly, he felt a sharp, searing pain in his leg. The shark had clamped down, its teeth sinking deep into his flesh. The pain was excruciating, but Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He thrashed violently, trying to free himself from the shark's grip. He used his free leg to kick at the predator's head, landing a few desperate blows. The shark seemed momentarily confused, loosening its hold. Jack took the opportunity to break free, but the damage was done. His leg was severely injured, and blood was now clouding the water around him. The predator, sensing blood, was far from done. It circled back quickly, its movements more aggressive. Jack, now barely able to move his injured leg, tried to swim toward the boat. His breaths were ragged and his energy was fading fast. He reached for the edge of the boat, his fingers just inches from grabbing hold, when the shark made another charge. This time, the impact was brutal. The shark rammed Jack from below, its body slamming into him with tremendous force. Jack was knocked under, the water around him turning red. He tried to fight back, but his strength was nearly gone. His vision blurred as he struggled to reach the surface, but the shark's relentless attack kept dragging him deeper. Nearby, 2 fishing boats noticed the violent splashing and quickly realized something was wrong. The crew of one boat, the Miss Rachel, saw Jack's small vessel swaying dangerously and rushed to help. The men on board tried to approach carefully, shouting and splashing the water to scare off the shark. Another boat, the Sea Breeze, joined in, its crew throwing life rings into the water in a desperate attempt to help. The rescuers reached Jack's boat, but there was no sign of him. The water was stained with blood, and the shark's dorsal fin could still be seen cutting through the waves before it finally disappeared into the depths. The men on the boats were left staring at the gruesome scene, horrified by the outcome. Jack's boat, still afloat but empty, was filled with scattered fishing gear and a trail of blood on its deck. The rescuers searched the area frantically, hoping to find Jack. They pulled up a torn fishing line and his cap floating nearby, but there was no sign of his body. The rescue teams tried to contain the grim reality of what had just happened. A seasoned fisherman had been taken by one of the ocean's most powerful predators, right off his own boat in broad daylight. The Miss Rachel and Sea Breeze stayed in the area for hours, scouring the water for any trace of Jack. But as the sun began to set, it became clear that the Gulf had claimed yet another victim. Jack's boat, adrift and silent, was a haunting reminder of the sudden and brutal power of nature. On a warm morning in June 1997, Lisa Adams felt the familiar thrill of excitement as she approached the shores of Waimea Bay, an isolated beach on the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii. At 25 years old, Lisa was a passionate surfer who loved the challenge of big waves. She had been surfing for years and was always seeking the perfect wave, often venturing out to less crowded spots for a more private experience. That day, she had decided to go alone, craving the peace that only the ocean could offer. Waimea Bay, renowned for its massive winter waves, is quieter during the summer months, drawing in a few locals and daring surfers. It's also a region known for its marine life, from sea turtles to dolphins, and sometimes great white sharks. Although rare, these apex predators have been spotted patrolling deeper waters, particularly during the summer when water temperatures rise, bringing more fish to the surface. It was around 10 a.m. when Lisa arrived at the beach. There were only a handful of people, mostly sunbathers and a few local fishermen. She unloaded her surfboard from her car, quickly applied some wax to its surface, and zipped up her wetsuit. After checking her gear and taking a few deep breaths, she waded into the water, paddling out with a strong, steady rhythm. The waves were ideal, big but not too aggressive, with smooth faces perfect for carving. For the first hour, Lisa caught several good waves, her confidence growing with each ride. She felt at ease, relishing the solitude and freedom of the open water. As she paddled back out after a particularly exhilarating ride, Lisa noticed something different. The water ahead looked darker, as if a large shadow was passing underneath. She paused, trying to get a clearer look, but the waves distorted her view. Shrugging it off as seaweed or a school of fish, she continued paddling, positioning herself for the next set. Suddenly, Lisa caught sight of a large dorsal fin cutting through the water just 15 feet away. Her heart raced. It was unmistakable. A great white shark, at least 15 feet long, was heading directly toward her. Panic set in, but Lisa knew she had to remain calm. She tried to make her movements slow and deliberate, hoping to avoid provoking the predator. But the shark had already locked its focus on her. Before Lisa could react, the shark breached the water with terrifying speed. Its massive jaws opened wide. It lunged at her surfboard, clamping down with powerful force. The impact was brutal, knocking Lisa off the board and into the water. She felt a surge of cold fear as the predator's body crashed against hers, dragging her under the surface. Lisa thrashed desperately, trying to free herself from the shark's grip. She kicked and punched with all her strength, but the predator's hold was relentless. The water around her turned red, a chilling sign that the shark had broken through her wetsuit and into her flesh. Her vision blurred as she struggled for air, each second feeling like an eternity. Back on the beach, a local fisherman named Kai noticed the commotion. He saw Lisa's surfboard floating erratically, then suddenly split in two as the shark continued its attack. He yelled for help, running toward the water's edge, but he was helpless against the predator's force. Kai tried to signal to another fisherman nearby, who had binoculars and confirmed what they both feared. Lisa was in the grip of a great white shark and it wasn't letting go. As the shark pulled Lisa deeper, she managed one last desperate attempt to break free, striking the shark's nose with all her remaining strength. The predator hesitated, releasing her briefly, but only to clamp down again, this time on her leg. Lisa's body was limp from exhaustion, and her attempts to resist faded as the shark's powerful jaws dragged her further into the depths. Within minutes, the shark disappeared into deeper waters, leaving only Lisa's broken surfboard and pieces of her wetsuit bobbing on the surface. The beach, usually a scene of peace and tranquility, had turned into a place of horror and disbelief. The few bystanders watched in shock as Kai and others tried to swim out to recover anything they could find. They pulled in the torn surfboard, its jagged edges a grim testament to the attack's violence. Rescue teams were quickly alerted, with helicopters arriving to conduct an aerial search of the area. Boats from the local Coast Guard joined the effort, scanning the waters for any sign of Lisa. Divers were deployed, but the water's clarity had diminished with the blood and scattered debris, making the search more difficult and dangerous. Hours passed, with the beach slowly filling with more locals who had heard about the attack. Lisa's friends, who had been expecting her back for a lunch gathering, arrived at the scene, confused and terrified when they saw the rescue efforts underway. The realization of what had happened left them devastated. As night fell, the rescue teams had little choice but to halt their search, vowing to return at first light. The next morning, the Coast Guard resumed their efforts, but the ocean had reclaimed its calm surface with no trace of the attack remaining. Only Lisa's surfboard, retrieved from the day before, and a few pieces of her wetsuit were left as grim reminders. The incident shocked the local community and became a chilling story among surfers in Hawaii, a stark warning of the lurking dangers beneath the waves, even in waters that seemed familiar and safe. It was late December 1995, and a group of college friends from the United States had decided to celebrate their graduation with a dream vacation in South Africa. They had chosen Durban, a vibrant coastal city along the Indian Ocean, known for its warm waters, sandy beaches, and exciting surf. The friends, Brad Miller, 22, Sarah Reed, 21, Greg Thompson, 23, Rachel Lewis, 22, and Mark Foster, 24, were thrilled to escape the cold back home and enjoy the heat of a South African summer. By their third day in Durban, the group had fully embraced the beach lifestyle, spending hours swimming, surfing, and playing beach volleyball. On December 28th, they decided to visit a less crowded beach farther up the coast, one that locals had recommended for its calm waters. It was a small, picturesque spot called Umhlanga Rocks, often popular among surfers but quieter during the mid-afternoon. The friends arrived around noon, setting up towels, umbrellas, and a cooler full of drinks. Laughter filled the air as they applied sunscreen, joked about the rough waves, and dared each other to swim out farther. The water looked inviting, shimmering under the hot sun. They hadn't noticed a fishing boat about 200 meters offshore, where local fishermen were pulling in a haul of fish. What the friends also didn't know was that the activity had drawn the attention of sharks, mainly bull sharks, which are known to frequent the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. Brad, an athletic and adventurous swimmer, was the first to run into the water, shouting for his friends to follow. One by one, the others joined him, splashing and swimming further out. The group felt carefree, their laughter mingling with the sound of waves. Brad, leading the way, was always the daring one. He swam a little farther than the others, riding small waves and encouraging his friends to follow. The ocean was a mix of fun and challenge as the friends swam, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Bull sharks, often called the bulldogs of the sea, are aggressive and territorial, particularly when they sense food. Attracted by the fishing boat's catch, several bull sharks had begun to move closer to shore, drawn by the scent of fish in the water. As the group continued to splash and play, Brad suddenly felt something bump against his leg. It was hard and fast, but he assumed it was just a piece of driftwood or debris. He laughed it off, pushing it aside with his foot, but the water around him suddenly became eerily quiet, and Brad's instinct told him something was wrong. He tried to call out to his friends, but before he could make a sound, he was pulled under with brutal force. The group, still splashing and laughing, didn't notice at first. It was only when Rachel looked over and realized that Brad had vanished that a sense of unease began to creep in. Sarah and Mark scanned the water, expecting to see Brad surface with a grin, playing one of his usual pranks. But then they saw it. A massive bull shark breaking the surface, thrashing violently. The water turned red as the shark bit into Brad's leg, shaking its head with terrifying strength. The friends froze in horror, unable to process what was happening. The scene was surreal. One moment they were enjoying the water, and the next, their friend was in the jaws of a predator. Panic set in. Greg and Mark shouted for everyone to swim back to shore, trying to pull Sarah and Rachel along with them. The two women, paralyzed by shock, struggled to move at first, but the urgency in the men's voices snapped them into action. They began to swim back frantically, adrenaline pushing their limbs faster than ever before. Meanwhile, Brad fought desperately beneath the surface. He tried to kick the shark's snout, aiming for its eyes and gills, common tactics for breaking free. But the predator was relentless, its grip firm and unforgiving. Brad's strength was fading fast as the shark pulled him deeper, each second feeling like an eternity. The friends reached the shore, gasping for air and looking back, hoping against hope to see Brad emerge from the water. But there was only a cloud of blood where he had been moments before. Rachel fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, while Sarah clung to Greg, her body shaking with shock. Mark, barely able to breathe, shouted for help, waving his arms to attract attention from nearby beachgoers. By now, the entire beach had fallen silent, people staring out at the ocean in horror. The lifeguards, already alerted, launched rescue boats into the water. The boats sped toward the bloody area, hoping to reach Brad in time. The crew members leaned over the edge, scanning the water for any sign of movement. One of them, a seasoned diver named Peter, grabbed a long pole to fend off the shark if necessary. As the boat neared the scene, the crew saw fragments of Brad's swim trunks and a piece of his flipper floating on the surface. Peter, holding onto a life ring, prepared to dive in, but the shark's dorsal fin reappeared, cutting through the waves with menacing speed. It circled the area aggressively, making any rescue attempt too dangerous. The crew was forced to retreat, unable to intervene. Back on the beach, Sarah collapsed onto the sand, crying hysterically. Rachel's face was pale, her eyes fixed on the ocean as if willing Brad to reappear. Greg and Mark tried to console them, but their own expressions were filled with helplessness. The vacation that had started with excitement and laughter had turned into a scene of devastation, a nightmare unfolding in front of dozens of stunned onlookers. Hours passed, with rescue boats and divers continuing their efforts. Helicopters hovered overhead, scanning the water from above. But as dusk approached, the search had yielded no trace of Brad beyond what had been found earlier. The beach, once filled with the sounds of joy and laughter, was now consumed by a heavy silence, interrupted only by the sobs of Brad's friends and the distant sound of rescue sirens. Marco Santini was no stranger to the depths of the ocean. At 38, he was an experienced diver with over 2 decades of exploring underwater caves around the world. On the morning of May 15, 1998, Marco was preparing for what he believed to be another thrilling but routine dive off the coast of Cozumel, Mexico. Cozumel is famous for its coral reefs and intricate cave systems, drawing divers from around the globe. The waters are warm, inviting, and rich with marine life, including various shark species such as nurse sharks, hammerheads, and the elusive reef shark. This particular dive, however, was special for Marco. He was venturing into the Punta Sur cave system, one of Cozumel's deepest and most mysterious underwater networks. Known as the Devil's Throat, the cave earned its ominous nickname due to its narrow passageways, unpredictable currents, and the eerie sense of isolation that increased with every meter descended. Marco's goal was to reach the innermost chamber, a feat that few divers had accomplished. He felt ready, his gear meticulously checked and his mind focused. Marco's diving partner, Carlos Mendoza, was a local diver who had accompanied Marco on several previous dives. Carlos knew the dangers of cave diving well. He briefed Marco again before they set off, emphasizing the importance of caution in these complex cave systems. After ensuring their equipment was secure and functional, the two divers signaled to each other and began their descent. The water was clear as Marco and Carlos started to go deeper, moving with ease through the initial sections of the cave. The light filtered down through the water, giving Marco a clear view of the vibrant coral formations and the small schools of fish that swam nearby. Marco felt a surge of excitement. He loved the serenity of the deep ocean, where time seemed to slow and everything else faded away. As they reached the mouth of the main cave, Marco and Carlos signaled their plan. Marco would proceed into the narrower sections, while Carlos stayed back as a safety measure. Marco took a deep breath, adjusted his flashlight, and carefully entered the tight passage, squeezing through with deliberate movements. The space was confining, barely wide enough for Marco to maneuver comfortably, but he had trained for this. Visibility quickly began to drop as the narrow tunnel turned darker. Marco remained focused, using his flashlight to guide his way. The cave walls were jagged, and he took care not to brush against them, knowing that even a slight misstep could snag his gear. The silence was total, broken only by the sound of his breathing through the regulator. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, but Marco thrived on this kind of challenge. About 15 minutes into the narrow section, Marco noticed a sudden shift in the water's current. He paused, scanning the darkness ahead. His instincts told him to proceed cautiously, but the thrill of exploring the unknown pushed him forward. As he advanced deeper into the cave, a large, shadowy figure appeared in the dim beam of his flashlight. It was a large reef shark about 8 feet long. The shark, clearly agitated by Marco's presence, moved with sudden, jerky movements. Reef sharks, though generally not aggressive, can be territorial, especially in confined spaces like caves. Marco tried to maintain a steady pace, hoping to pass without incident. But the shark's body language was tense and it began circling slowly. Marco's heart raced. He knew he needed to avoid sudden movements, but in the confined cave his options were limited. The shark, feeling trapped, made a sudden lunge toward Marco. Its powerful jaws closed around his shoulder, ripping through his wetsuit and gear. Marco's body jolted from the impact and pain shot through him. He swung his arm wildly, trying to dislodge the shark's grip. The narrow confines of the cave made it difficult for Marco to maneuver. He kicked frantically, trying to create distance, but the shark wasn't retreating. It charged again, this time biting into Marco's air hose. Marco felt a sharp tug as his air supply was partially severed, causing bubbles to burst around him. He fumbled for his emergency regulator, struggling to replace it while keeping an eye on the shark's erratic movements. Disoriented and panicking, Marco tried to find his way back through the narrow tunnel. But the shark, still aggressive, continued its assault. It rammed into Marco's side, causing him to lose control and slam into the cave wall. The impact left him dazed, his vision blurring momentarily. He felt his left arm go numb from the initial bite, and the weight of his gear made it difficult to regain balance. Marco knew he had to retreat, but the cave's twists and turns were disorienting, especially with the murky water clouded by his blood and bubbles. He tried to follow the faint glow of his flashlight, but the cave felt like a maze, each turn looking the same. The shark, now less visible in the dark water, seemed to vanish momentarily, but Marco knew it was still nearby. As Marco tried to push forward, the lack of air became critical. His damaged regulator was failing and he was running out of time. He struggled to keep calm, but the pain, the dark water, and the shark's presence made it nearly impossible. He tried to swim upward, hoping to find a way out, but the cave's ceiling remained low, blocking his path. Back at the entrance, Carlos noticed that Marco had been gone longer than planned. Concerned, he attempted to enter the narrow passage, but the tight space made it difficult to advance quickly. He called for help over his radio, signaling to the surface team that something was wrong. The response was immediate, with rescue divers preparing to enter the cave. Marco, now severely weakened, made one last attempt to swim toward the light he thought he saw in the distance. But the shark, sensing his vulnerability, made a final charge, its body brushing past Marco with terrifying force. Marco's movement slowed, his vision fading as the lack of oxygen took its toll. By the time rescue divers reached Marco's location, it was too late. His body was found lodged in a narrow section of the cave, his gear damaged and his wetsuit torn. The divers, trained for recovery missions, carefully retrieved him, bringing him back to the surface where the crew awaited. The bite marks on Marco's body told a gruesome tale of his final moments, a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk within the ocean's hidden depths. What had started as an expedition into the beauty of an underwater cave had turned into a deadly encounter, with Marco becoming one more tragic story in the unforgiving world beneath the waves. Amy Turner arrived in Clearwater Beach, Florida, on a sunny afternoon in early June 1996. At 26, she was a free-spirited traveler from Ohio, seeking a break from her office job. Amy was on a week-long vacation, determined to make the most of her time in Florida. The day had been filled with beachside cocktails, sunbathing, and swimming in the warm Gulf waters. Clearwater Beach is one of Florida's most popular destinations, known for its wide sandy shores and inviting waters. The Gulf of Mexico is home to various marine species, including the dangerous bull shark. While shark attacks are rare, bull sharks are known for their aggressive nature, especially in murky waters or at night when they hunt closer to shore. It was a typical summer evening on June 15th, and the beach was beginning to empty out as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was still warm, the last remnants of sunlight fading away. Amy, sitting alone on the sand, felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in a while. Despite warnings posted along the beach about recent shark activity, she couldn't resist the allure of a midnight swim under the full moon. As the moonlight illuminated the water, Amy stripped down to her swimsuit, leaving her sandals and towel on the sand. She took a deep breath, savoring the cool night breeze. She felt an adrenaline rush as she waded into the water, her feet sinking into the soft sand below. The water was cooler than during the day, but Amy found it refreshing. She waded deeper until the water reached her waist, feeling the gentle waves against her body. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the sound of waves breaking the stillness of the night. Amy swam further out, enjoying the feeling of solitude. The moonlight cast a silver glow across the water, and Amy floated on her back, staring up at the starry sky. She felt a sense of peace that was rare in her busy life back home. But just as she closed her eyes, something brushed against her leg. It was a light touch, almost like seaweed, and Amy dismissed it as such. She continued to float, trying to recapture her earlier sense of calm. Moments later, the sensation returned, but this time it was stronger, a firm bump that jolted Amy back to reality. Her heart raced as she realized she wasn't alone in the water. She quickly turned upright, scanning the dark water around her, but it was impossible to see anything clearly. Fear gripped her as she started to swim back toward the shore, her strokes becoming faster and more frantic. Before Amy could make much progress, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her right leg. She gasped, her voice breaking the silence of the night. The pain was intense and she struggled to keep her head above water. Instinctively, she tried to kick away, but the force pulling her down was too strong. It was a bull shark, its powerful jaws locked onto her leg. Amy thrashed wildly, trying to free herself, but the shark's grip was relentless. The water churned violently as the predator pulled her further from shore. She managed to let out a few desperate screams, her voice echoing across the empty beach. She clawed at the water, trying to reach the surface, but the shark's strength was overwhelming. As Amy continued to struggle, the shark performed a violent shake, ripping into her flesh. The pain was unbearable and Amy's energy began to fade rapidly. She tried to punch the shark's snout, a known weak spot, but her blows were weak and ineffective. The water was now murky with blood, making it even harder for Amy to see anything. The bull shark, sensing its prey's weakening struggle, pulled Amy deeper. Her attempts to kick free grew weaker as her strength faded. She could feel the cold water enveloping her and her vision blurred. The sound of her heartbeat pounded in her ears. drowned out only by the terrifying silence of the deep water. On the beach, a lone security guard named Tom Baker, who was doing a routine patrol of the area, heard faint screams. He looked out over the dark ocean but saw nothing beyond the faint outlines of waves. He grabbed his flashlight, scanning the water in an attempt to identify the source of the noise, but the moonlit waters revealed no movement. Tom called for backup, alerting local authorities to the possibility of someone in distress. The beach, now completely deserted, became a scene of quiet urgency as a few lifeguards and officers arrived to survey the area. They shouted Amy's name, hoping for a response, but the only sound was the crashing waves. As dawn broke the next morning, rescue boats combed the area while helicopters hovered above, searching for any sign of Amy. The water, now calm and bathed in the soft light of morning, gave no clues about the tragedy that had unfolded hours earlier. Then, on shore, a lifeguard found a torn piece of Amy's swimsuit washed up on the sand. Nearby, her sandals and towel remained undisturbed, a haunting reminder of the carefree night that had turned deadly. Despite a thorough search by divers, only fragments of Amy's belongings were found, scattered by the waves. The chilling discovery led to immediate warnings from local authorities, urging beachgoers to avoid night swims, especially in areas known for shark activity. Amy's disappearance became a grim tale for the locals, a tragic story of a tourist lured by the beauty of the ocean, only to fall victim to its most fearsome predator. The annual Cape Town Fishing Classic was in full swing on April 14, 2001. Held in the chilly waters of False Bay, South Africa, the competition had drawn anglers from across the country, each eager to reel in the biggest catch. False Bay, famous for its great white shark population, is a thrilling spot for fishing enthusiasts, offering a chance to snag large fish like yellowfin tuna or barracuda. But the same waters also host one of the densest populations of great whites in the world, making it a dangerous playground. Among the competitors that morning was Rick Saunders, a 47-year-old seasoned fisherman who had been part of the tournament for years. Rick was known for his boldness, often choosing the more unpredictable waters in search of big catches. With weather conditions nearly perfect and the bay relatively calm, he felt optimistic about his chances. He checked his tackle, baited his hooks, and settled into his small boat, a 22-foot vessel named Seahawk. Rick's plan was simple: head toward the deeper waters where the larger fish usually gathered. As the competition began around 7 a.m., Rick motored toward his chosen spot near Seal Island, a small rocky outcrop infamous for being a hunting ground for great whites. The island, located about 3 miles off the coast, was teeming with seals that often attracted sharks. Rick was unfazed by the reputation of the area. He had fished there many times before and knew the risks well. The morning passed with moderate success. Rick caught a few sizable fish, but nothing that stood out among the other competitors' catches. He remained focused, waiting for that one big hit. Around 11:30 a.m., as the sun climbed higher, Rick felt a sudden strong tug on his line. He leaned forward, tightening his grip on the rod. The pull was powerful, causing the boat to tilt slightly. Rick's heart raced. This felt like the catch he had been waiting for. Rick struggled with the line, his muscles straining as he tried to reel in the heavy fish. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he planted his feet firmly on the deck, fighting against the pull. Other competitors nearby noticed the commotion and watched with growing interest. Rick's rod bent almost double, indicating that whatever was on the line was massive. Just as Rick was about to gain the upper hand, something unexpected happened. A massive shape breached the water with terrifying speed. A great white shark, its jaws wide open, lunged toward the surface. The force of the breach was so strong that it snapped Rick's fishing rod in half. The shark's body slammed into the side of the boat, shaking it violently. Rick, caught off guard, lost his balance and stumbled backward, barely managing to keep from falling overboard. The shark, now confused and agitated, circled the boat aggressively. Rick tried to regain control, grabbing for the broken rod with one hand while stabilizing himself with the other. But the shark, driven into a frenzy by the chaos, made a sudden lunge at the boat again. The impact this time was even stronger, causing Rick to slip. His foot got caught on a loose rope, and before he could react, he fell overboard, landing with a splash. The cold water hit Rick like a shock. Panic surged as he tried to orient himself, his limbs flailing as he fought to stay afloat. His life jacket kept him buoyant, but the aggressive shark was only a few feet away. Spectators from nearby boats shouted, some reaching for radios to call for help, while others watched in horror, unsure of how to intervene. Rick desperately tried to swim back toward his boat, but the shark closed the distance with alarming speed. It swam beneath him, then suddenly surged upward, clamping its jaws around Rick's torso. The force of the bite was overwhelming, and Rick's screams echoed across the water. The shark shook its head violently, tearing into Rick's flesh. The water churned red as Rick struggled to break free, punching at the shark's snout with all his remaining strength. But the great white's grip was relentless. With each thrash, it pulled Rick further away from the boat, dragging him into deeper water. Nearby competitors, horrified by the sight, could do nothing but watch as the predator tore into Rick with terrifying efficiency. Rescue boats were dispatched immediately, speeding toward the scene in a desperate attempt to intervene. The first responders reached Rick's boat within minutes, but by then he was already out of sight. The only evidence of the attack was a large slick of blood on the surface and pieces of Rick's torn life jacket floating nearby. The rescue crew threw life rings into the water, hoping to pull Rick to safety, but it was clear that the situation was dire. Divers prepared to enter the water, though they were well aware of the risks, given the agitated shark still circling below. The ocean, now calm and silent, seemed to mock their efforts. Meanwhile, the crowd of onlookers at the tournament's main hub on shore fell silent as news of the attack spread. Competitors who had witnessed the incident up close were visibly shaken, their faces pale. The organizers, realizing the severity of the situation, quickly halted the event, urging all participants to return to shore immediately. As the day wore on, rescue teams continued to search for any trace of Rick. The water was combed thoroughly, but the efforts were futile. Only fragments of his life jacket and some fishing gear were recovered, scattered across the bay. The once energetic competition had turned into a scene of shock and grief. Rick Saunders, a man known for his bravery and passion for fishing, had become yet another tragic victim of the unpredictable dangers lurking beneath the ocean's surface. The Cape Town Fishing Classic, an event meant to celebrate the joy of the sea, had instead turned into a reminder of its deadly potential.